So for my macroeconomic presentation, I covered the deflation in Japan. So introduction, Japan experienced a prolonged period of falling prices and stagnant economic growth, which began in the early 1990s. 1991 marks the official beginning of the deflation period, and this period is often referred to as the lost decade or the lost score, which is the period from 1991 to around 2010. So it was really closer to 2 decades which they experienced this, and it was caused by a complexity of economic challenges, including financial markets, consumer behavior, demographic shifts, and policy responses, which I will cover in this presentation. So for some historical context, Japan experienced a speculative bubble in the late 1980s, and this caused a surge in asset prices, which led to excessive spending and investment in the economy. And one of the main sectors affected by this was the real estate market, where prices reached astronomical levels, the highest they've ever been in Japan. And if you look at this graph up top here, 1991 around was when it reached the peak, and since then it has been steadily declining up until 2010, which is when this period of deflation came to a close. And since then it has even seen a slight increase, which has mostly taken place in the past 4 or 5 years. But another area that was affected was the stock market, where stock prices skyrocketed also to an all-time high in Japan due to speculative trading and investor euphoria because of the speculative bubble that caused the citizens of Japan to invest more than they should have based on the speculative bubble they thought they had. And banks' aggressive lending practices led to a massive credit expansion as well, which all contributed to the bubble that burst in the early 1990s, which marked beginning, the official beginning of Japan's deflation. Also, during this time, Japan experienced a great deal of wage and price inflation, which was mainly due to the aging population and labor market dynamics that caused a prolonged era of low wage growth, as the aging population made it hard for many of the businesses at this time to find skilled workers that could perform the jobs they needed, as well as automation and technology improvements that changed the dynamics of wages, which resulted in real wage decreases or stagnation in several industries, which we have seen in almost every country in the past 2 decades. So, on top of the deflation they were experiencing due to that speculative bubble that started it, the automation and technology improvements did not help, as it took more jobs away from the citizens of Japan. So, to try and combat this, the Bank of Japan instituted a number of monetary policies, such as negative interest rates and quantitative easing. But despite these efforts, Japan has still seen low and sometimes negative price inflation, which was mainly due to weak consumer demand, as people weren't going out and spending money at this time, which was also affected by the state of the world economy, not just Japan, and the structural issues within the Japanese economy. The Bank of Japan also made many changes to the monetary policy and interest rates during this period of deflation, and one of the main ways they affected them was by engaging in quantitative easing in order to increase the money supply by lowering interest rates. And this is typically done through purchasing government bonds and other financial assets. And like I said, it aims to lower the long-term interest rates and stimulate economic activity, as the more money in circulation, the better that is for the economy. So the Bank of Japan also introduced a zero interest rate policy, which they referred to as the ZIRP, and they instituted this in the early 2000s, an attempt to combat deflation and stimulate economic growth. But eventually this turned into a negative interest rate policy, referred to as the NIRP, where banks were charged for excessive reserves. People impacted during this time were borrowers, savers, and investors, and financial institutions. As borrowers, the business and individuals that did partake in the borrowing benefited from lower borrowing costs, which stimulates investment in capital projects, real estate, and consumer spending. And savers and investors, including pension funds and retirees, face many challenges in generating sufficient returns on their investment because of the low interest rate environment. They were not able to receive as much back as they typically would. And then financial institutions, as well as banks and other financial institutions, experience compressed net interest margins due to the lower lending rates, which impacted their profitability and negatively affected these financial institutions maybe more than anyone else was affected in this economy. Currently in Japan, they have experienced a gradual economic recovery as GDP growth has shown improvement. Look at the graph down here. After the pandemic, or is at one of its lowest points, has slowly been increasing, and current day is at its highest it's been since pre-pandemic, and the future outlook has it still slowly increasing as we move forward. Something that helped out this GDP was the monetary policies that the Bank of Japan implemented, which included a yield curve control and asset purchases, which was meant to target the 2% inflation rate, as well as the stimulus package that Japan implemented of $490 billion, which was meant to boost economic activity, including infrastructure project subsidies and incentives to support businesses and consumers. So, for the future of Japan, they have been making structural reforms, trying to reform the labor market, deregulation, and invest more in technology and digitalization. And one of the problems they're having with their labor market is the aging population, which is a long-term challenge for them. And to try and combat the aging population, the government has been encouraging labor force participation among women and seniors, and they've also been trying to improve healthcare and social security systems to encourage more labor participation among these women and seniors. And they've also been focusing on green initiatives. They've focused on sustainability and renewable energy, carbon reduction, and promoting environmentally friendly practices across all industries in the country in an attempt to keep seeing growth and increase GDP.